You get like
The
12
equivalent
twists.
of 12 Twix.
A half an hour.
Like one little bit.
But it's like 5.
Congratulations, you made it through your first month. It's now September. Well done. That month flew by.
How old are you?
Timeline for things going on. Remember, Tuesday, so after Labor Day weekend is when you're coming back with Heart of Darkness, chapters 1 and 2 read. So those first 2 parts, that takes you up to, I think it was page 128. If you're encountering any issues or questions, problems, let me know. Now, Mr. Kane, can you tell me what happened? I don't get it. It's going to be a little too broad. But any specific issues, questions you have, by all means, let me know. So far as essays for what's happening, yesterday we did the peer edit for prompt number 1. Once you have those peer edits taken care of, my advice would be to step away from prompt number 1 for a little bit, give your mind a break from that particular essay, because we're now going to shift attention and focus to prompt number 2, which we're going to look at here in a few minutes. You will have a rough draft for prompt number 2, same criteria we did for prompt number 1 for next Friday, so a week from tomorrow. So that will be September the 9th. So September 9th, peer edit, prompt number 2. September the 15th, which is then the following Thursday, 2 weeks from today, is when you would be submitting your final copies of your the Grapes of Wrath essays. So the plan would be this week you focus on prompt number 2, and then the following week, any editing, polishing, just kind of finalizing things you need to do for those drafts, you would take care of that. So 2 weeks is kind of D-Day so far as turning in your peer edit sheets and final copies. But the hope is step back from prompt number 1, focus on prompt number 2, then we can come back to both prompts, make any changes, finishing up that we need to before we submit them on Thursday, September the 15th. Any questions about like those due dates, schedule, that kind of stuff? Yeah. Okay. So next Friday and then the following Thursday, and those days are on your weekly syllabus already. So it wouldn't be anything brand new, but that's kind of the schedule that would be going on. And the hope is too, now with rough draft number 2 for prompt number 2, you kind of have at least a little bit of understanding of time commitment that it may take. How long did it take to find some examples? How long did it take you to convince yourself to sit down and actually start? How many breaks were you taking in between? All of those kinds of things. You also could have, and I mentioned this to a lot of you as going around, you might be looking things up for prompt number 2 and go, hey, that would be good for prompt number 1, and maybe make some changes to it. So you can still have that first prompt in the back of your mind, but I think for your sanity, for the most part, you want to kind of shift your focus to the next one. Today we're going to go over prompt number 2. We're going to talk about the handouts that you picked up coming in, and then tomorrow is going to give us a chance to kind of finalize any of those things that we need to before we move on to other stuff next week with Heart of Darkness taking place. You got 2 papers when you came in. The big sheet we're probably just going to wait on for till tomorrow. But what is on that piece of paper would be you have some sample introductory paragraphs for the Grapes of Wrath essay. I did not lift these from any of your essays, so you don't have to start looking for yours or anything like that. These are from past years. I don't even remember who wrote any of these examples, so you could ask, and I have no idea. But we'll take a look at them, things that you like about them, things that you don't like about them. But there's certainly reasons as to why I picked these specific ones. Any issues that you realize that could be existing within your rough draft, tomorrow is also a time to bring that up, because we can try to dissect it together as a class and offer any kind of advice and support. On the back of the sheet, if you flip it over, there's a sample body paragraph. Now, tried to make it pretty obvious this is not for the Grapes of Wrath, because you're going, who's O'Connor and Red Sammy and what in the world is going on? But it's a sample body paragraph that I want us to use. Not saying it's perfect by any means, but there might be some tips, ideas from it that very well could carry over to the writing that you're going to do. But I wanted to wait until you had an essay under your belt before we started looking at some specific examples. The half sheet of paper, though, that you've got, I do want to go over that with you right now. Just meant to kind of be tips for you to keep in mind while you're working on your next prompt. Also could be tips to keep in mind while you're working on some future essays for future assignments that we have. So, and this is based off things that I was noticing yesterday. Make sure that when you're looking at the title of the book, you do the whole entire title. So that does include the word "the." We got italicized along with it. If you are having any issues with to be verbs, make sure you ask for help. and tomorrow we're going to take a look at trying to how to eradicate or at least limit those things. Diction, figurative language, remember you need to specify those things. And if you do have any concerns about the introduction, your course syllabus does have a little bit of a step-by-step approach that you could take for that introduction. And it also has that step-by-step that you could use for the conclusion. The clincher statement in your conclusion tends to go hand in hand with the attention grabber that you have in your introduction. They would both be dealing with the same concept, the same idea. If you're looking at the abuse of authority within the Grapes of Wrath for your first essay, probably introduce that concept within your intro. The hope is, with your hook, the hope is that the clincher would then offer some kind of gained insight that you have learned through the experience of reading the book, analyzing it, writing the essay. So when it's all said and done, what information can you pass on? Make sure that for your attention grabber or your clincher that you avoid rhetorical questions. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be a migrant during the Dust Bowl? No. No, I have not. I have no desire to keep on reading. For a clincher, you don't want to do, and now you know what it would be like to be a migrant. How will you treat people the next time? You're not offering any insight. You're taking the responsibility of coming up with an argument, and now you're passing it on to me as the reader. So make sure you stay away from those rhetorical questions. Body paragraphs, I'll let you look over this on your own and see if there's any issues you have. One of the big things, though, would be establish the context of the quotation, because I think sometimes people are so worried about finding quotations, passages, that they fail to explain what's going on within the quotation. The most important part is going to be the analysis aspect that we have, but you certainly want to let us know what's going on novel-wise, plot-wise within the course of the example that you are using. Your citations are always going to be at the end of sentences, but make sure that you don't end your paragraph with a quotation. It's your body paragraph, so we want to have your words to end that overall idea that you have. Any parts of what it says for intro, body, or conclusion paragraphs that you're not sure what it's referencing. At the very bottom, there's the list. These all would be the to be verbs. So this is what we would be keeping out of the intro, keeping out of the conclusion, keeping out of the first and last sentences of the body paragraphs. Okay. It's like Selena's trying to pretend they're not there. I don't see it, I don't see it, I don't see it. If you want me to write them on your head backwards with Sharpie so you see them every morning, I will do that for you. No problem. Good.
I was really
Any questions? All right, take a look at prompt number 2 in your course syllabus. I believe it's page 6. And the worst thing you can do with the to be verbs is like go into a sense of denial or state of denial. If you have any sentences right now in that first draft that you have no idea how you would get rid of them, tomorrow when we go, anybody have any sentences that you can't get rid of the to be verbs, you raise your hand and you tell us the sentence, and then we'll help you figure it out. The worst thing you can do is have 38 to be verbs and pretend that they're not going to be there, because I'll keep track of them and count them. When you have to be verbs in the intro, conclusion, first, last sentence of the body paragraphs, it's a half-point deduction. So, that essay score will go down based on the use of the to be verbs. The nice thing is once you get a little bit of practice at eliminating them, it does not become all that difficult, all that challenging, and it will start to kind of creep into your overall writing process that as we move forward and do other things, you won't even be thinking about it. So it's not going to be that bad, but you can't be afraid to admit that they're there, and you might need some help with it. Looking at prompt number 2 now. what do we notice so far as things that we like, things that we dislike, similarities, differences to what was already done? What's jumping out? Is that a good thing, bad thing? Okay, yeah, I mean, you might not be jumping up and down that I love these essays, this is awesome, but there's certainly a level of comfort. You've already done it, do it again. When we do your next essay, you're going to do it again, and then we'll probably do it again. AP exam, you're going to have 3 types of essay assignments. So one of them, I bet you can figure out, is going to be rhetorical analysis. So you see that word analyze, you start noticing anything with like literary techniques, devices, elements of language, you're dealing with rhetorical analysis. So that part is certainly the same. Doesn't mean the prompt by any means is going to be the same, but that characteristic is not going to be any different from what we did before. I'm assuming we're not too worried about the in a carefully argued essay. But what about the Steinbeck utilizes to critique the American culture phrase?
What chapter would that be found in the expository and narrative chapter?
Yeah, it would be found throughout the whole book.
Okay.
So the criteria that we use for the first rough draft, the little checklist that's still over there behind Dylan, you'd be using that same thing for this one. So we're still looking for a mix, a nice blend of expository narrative for this one as well. What do we think about that phrase? Like, is this good? Is this not as good compared to the effects of the Dust Bowl on the migrant people?
I mean, he critiques a lot. Almost pretty incredible. Yeah, I'll be fun.
It shouldn't be. Of the two, well, Andy?
I think it'd be easier because there's a wider array of parts of the American culture that we criticizing.
Okay, and I would tend to agree with you. I mean, if we make this as simple as possible, some of you are going to have this reaction, some of you are going to have this reaction, and some of you are still having this reaction. But
Is that stress?
No, that's
Sleeping.
they sleep on me, right?
I couldn't tell this was you. I'm sorry.
those are eyelashes. Drool. On your copy of The Grapes of Wrath. Okay, I'm having too much fun now. So we'll pretend that this one doesn't exist. Andy, I'm with you over here. Now, it's my prompt, so of course I'm going to be over there. What I like about this kind of wording is it gives you flexibility. It gives you freedom to do different things. The folks who tend to be over here on this side, it's not that you don't like having freedom and flexibility, but people, especially early on in the year, just tell me what you want me to do. And so the effects of the Dust Bowl on the migrant people was pretty specific, and I want you to write about the effects of the Dust Bowl on the migrant people. This one, yes, there's flexibility, there's an array of choices, but that can kind of be overwhelming for some folks, at this point. Prompts throughout the year for rhetorical analysis, it will vary. Sometimes you are given a specific argument that you need to prove. Sometimes you'll get things like this, or you'll get things that are even broader. You could have analyze the rhetorical devices that Steinbeck utilizes to advance his argument, where you completely have to come up with the argument, from scratch. So it's personal preference, at this point. Since you said there could be an array of possibilities, like what concepts, you don't have to give us all the examples by any means, but what concepts do you see as being potential arguments, so to speak?
One would be like the belief of social Darwinism in American culture.
Okay. Well, we got like Heart of Darkness and The Grapes of Wrath coming together. Did you say advancement of social Darwinism?
Well, I like social Darwinism in like business.
Okay. And if you recall, when we were discussing imperialism with Heart of Darkness, mentioned social Darwinism was one of the reasons for a new imperialism, and the whole idea that the rich should get richer, and if that's going to happen, that means then the poor are going to get poorer. Dylan, I'm going to come to you in a second. I just don't want to skip one thing. One thing that I do like about this phrase, Steinbeck utilizes to critique the American culture, I think you are given a pretty significant word that you could use to your benefit. Any idea as to what that word would be? Within just that part of the phrase.
Critique.
I'm thinking critique. What could you do with the word?
It's like an attitude.
If you go with the thesis statement, SPA, which you will,
It's his purpose.
it is a very straightforward purpose. So you have the ability to use critique as a purpose. You're not required to, but I'm not going to judge you as, come on, JT, come up with your own word. If the prompt is giving you, any kind of lead or any kind of hints or anything that can be beneficial, you may as well use it. Can you think of any terms besides critique that would still work? If you don't want to use critique. Could be a synonym or could be a word kind of similar in nature. What was the word? The hand went up, so you got a word.
I guess accuse or
Criticize. Alexis, did you have one? Expose.
flaw.
Hmm?
Like a flaw, I don't know how. I'm not sure.
Ridicule. I didn't hear what you said.
I said like to flaw the American culture. I don't know if that would work or not.
That's going to sound a little awkward. That get an AWK
Yeah.
next to it. Hannah, did you say ridicule? You could have something like condemn. Any others? Demean. I'll put it down. It'll kind of depend.
Okay.
Probably on the argument that you go with. I have a sense that would work with some, may not work, bless you, with others. If you're critiquing something, you're also judging, or assessing it, so that would be a possibility. Again, the main thing is, notice all of those are better than show.
You really hate that.
Oh, it drives me nuts.
Does it keep you?
If it shows up in your essay, it very well could.
Have you ever put that in your essay just in spite of you?
Probably.
That marked it.
So I'm just picking random, devices at this point, but you could go that imagery, details, and syntax criticize, social Darwinism in American business. And so now we got a pretty clear argument that, all right, that's what Annie's going to look at the whole way through. What other arguments about American culture would work? Bill?
Xenophobia or conservativeness, because like we have the Okies and the Reds and stuff like that. Separation.
And what was the other one you said, conservatism?
Yeah.
Would you put those two together, or are you thinking them as two separate?
I was thinking of them more together because
Okay.
they're, I guess red is more of an ideology than like a type or a person.
I'll mess that one up.
Red is fun. We did. Either way.
What does xenophobia mean?
It's the
Fear for
Fear of foreigners. And I'm assuming that you're thinking of California
Yeah.
as the migrants are coming in. Whether or not I go with that one, and you certainly could, there's no reason why it would not work. There's a definite rhetorical device that's jumping in my head, and I'm not thinking diction with Okies and all of that kind of stuff. It's not one we really talked a whole lot about with the first one. No. It's not one of those, it would fit under probably more like figurative language.
Just said
It would fit under figurative language.
I was thinking in my head.
Remember, there's not stupid questions, just stupid people.
Oh.
But you didn't ask a question, so you can't say I was calling you out on that one. Fear of foreigners. U.S. citizens are fearful of U.S. citizens. I find that to be somewhat ironic. So again, not saying that if Dylan went with it, he would have to go with irony, but sometimes certain terms, I would say, might lend themselves. So irony would certainly be a concept that you might look at, with that one. You could, if you thought that was too xenophobia in general, you're not comfortable going to be, going into that term or whatnot. Certainly, though, you could still mention something like discrimination or prejudice, and that would still give you some similar arguments that you would be able to use. If the term itself wasn't going to be comfortable for you. What else? Corruption of authority. Okay. Thinking like police. Okay. Okay. Why do you think they are corrupt? Like, not what do they do, but what do you think, whether it be emotions or, like, causes people to become...
I think a lot of that could relate back to, like, the xenophobia, some of, like, especially the police in California, they don't want the OPs coming in.
Okay. So, I mean, you could, let's say you go with xenophobia or discrimination, prejudice, you could still bring in the idea of corruption because it falls under. Or vice versa, you could be corruption of authority. One of your subtopics could kind of end up being like with that xenophobia comes in. Andy, you mentioned social Darwinism. I guess same question, what would push someone into that kind of belief system in your mind? Not just within the book, but just like generally speaking.
Assuming that you have the things you do purely because of how good you are.
Okay. So like a sense of, thinking of an E word, not ego. Do you remember the affluenza case? This was in Texas, probably like 3 or 4 years ago, where it was vehicular manslaughter. I forget it was a teenager. I don't remember if he was drunk or not, but I think he was. The argument that the defense attorney used was he has affluenza. Because his family is so wealthy, he's so used to getting whatever he wants, he doesn't realize the ramifications of his actions. And it worked. And so the argument would be, I think you said the word, entitlement. So, you could argue that he, if Andy's social Darwinism in business is making you go, yeah, I'm not doing a whole essay about that, but does he condemn or ridicule, criticize the sense of entitlement that people have within the U.S.? I think that would be certainly a valid argument that you could make.
We didn't have like a bad experience with mining that leads to believe that.
Wait, that?
We were, that felt we were just talking about like xenophobia.
Yeah.
And like why it would lead to that, why anybody would do that. Maybe they've had like a full
So,
experience.
Previous experiences, bias, allowing fear to overcome reason, logic, those could be things. You could certainly say entitlement could be an overall desire for power. You could argue desire for money. There's a word that we use for that. Greed. I'm trying to think, of a way to kind of put yours where you mentioned like having bad experience. You could argue overall lack of.
Maybe just ignorance.
All right, yeah. I want to say lack of ignorance.
Yeah, but just ignorance in general.
Maybe the pervasiveness of ignorance. And that one could work in a lot of different ways, where you could be arguing the ignorance of those who have the fear of foreigners, within California. You could also argue the ignorance of those who don't really seem to care, lack of knowledge. That one might be a little bit tougher to kind of like find textual support to show that the people in Pittsburgh don't care. But it doesn't just have to be going back to that whole fear of foreigner idea. One other thing, well, Angelina, you say yours, so I don't maybe take your answer.
I was gonna say, maybe you could also be critiquing how the Americans appreciation will
You're thinking of like the wealthy already, so. I'm thinking soapstone occasion. Why could this be a valid criticism of Steinbeck? Thinking again, going back to the soapstone, speaker, occasion, audience, I'm really thinking about the occasion. Any ideas?
It's like the end of the Great Depression. So if you had money, that was
There's a whole lot of people worse off than
Yeah.
you. Why do you need to try to advance yourself? You could argue that some of this might go to if you're going to allow yourself to make these horrific decisions, what may you lack? Which is
Common sense.
common sense, common knowledge. I'm thinking of M and V. Yeah, you could look at the lack of morality or the skewed American morals or values. And again, a lot of these can kind of play off one another. How about disregard for human what would be, well, that's a little too far. What would be some options to fill in that phrase? Imagery, irony, and details expose the disregard for human. What could be some words to fill in? Well-being could certainly be one. Life. I mean, and that could mean death, but you certainly don't have to kill a person to have a disregard for human life.
Feeling?
Feelings?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else? Rights. What? Dignity? That's a good one. So if we go back to, originally Andy going, well, it gives me some freedom to do different things. I mean, we're going all over the place from Darwinism to xenophobia, discrimination, corruption of authority, sense of entitlement, power, greed, pervasiveness of ignorance, lack of appreciation for what they already have, skewed American morals, disregard for human well-being, life, feelings, emotions, dignity, rights. I think there's something somewhere in there that you would be able to use. Doesn't mean right now you're going, that one, and I know what my examples, I'm done, thank you, I can do this Thursday night and everything will be fine. There's certainly still some effort, work that has to go into it, but I think it does give you a little bit more freedom to go in a direction that you want that better suits interests, and whatnot. You could get into, that corruption of capitalism if you wanted, or you can go in a totally different direction and take a look at some other concepts that would be present. So the hope is you do at least see some flexibility that would take place. At this point, I guess what would still be concerns that people have, whether it be the wording, whether it be the argument, the purposes, the strategies, the location of examples. What would keep you up at night if you still had to do the essay, for tomorrow? Besides literally doing the essay for tomorrow. Okay. Being able to identify the literary devices, just think about what ones would work. Okay. Any idea what argument you're leaning toward at this point?
Some of the one.
Lack of appreciation. Okay. So, for example, we'll go with the what would be examples from the book that people can start to think of where you would notice a lack of appreciation?
The guy eating a sandwich.
Without relish.
Yeah.
The guy selling cars.
The narrative,
Yeah.
or the expository chapter. Okay.
Like, he really doesn't care what kind of cars selling. It's just selling. It's just like,
Okay.
I forget the chapter it is, but it's like the guy that only has one eye. He's like complaining about.
Cyclops man.
Yeah, he's like complaining about his life.
So we're talking about the guy in the junkyard when Al and Tom.
He cried himself to sleep. I guess throughout most of the book you can say Brother Sharon. Yeah.
Okay. Any others coming to mind at this point? Not that we're planning out Angelina's essay for her, so we're careful as to how much detail we go in here.
Right. I mean, it doesn't really go into detail about how much it looks like homeowners. Homeowners in California because people are just living in camps along the side of the road.
Okay.
It doesn't go into much
People
detail, but
not in
People
not in the
not in the Hoovervilles or like government camps. So, like along Highway 66, no, you can't stay here. You need to pay money to use my yard, if you're going to kind of camp out.
Yeah.
So it could be landowners in that way or people who already own the peach farms or whatever
yeah,
the case may be.
Really
within-
anybody's land.
Okay, so landowners in general, and it could be throughout. Al and May, yeah. More so May is the one who.
I was very good.
Anyone notice in that? What does the truck driver do at the end? Because the truck driver comes in, is talking to May, and then the family comes in looking for the bread and the penny candy and all that stuff.
He pays for his food and then basically buys back with the nickel payment, I guess.
He leaves a large tip, and so the whole point of what he does is it makes up for the loss of income profit that would be coming in from the bread. So you could certainly have examples. Let's say you're looking at that lack of appreciation or maybe some morals and things like that. You do have some examples where people do have the morality and will chip in, and he doesn't go, May, this is for them. Because what happens if the truck driver does something like that? Don't worry, May, I'll leave a big tip. Gloating and kind of calling them out. He doesn't say anything, he just leaves it and gets up and goes. So you certainly do have little actions, and that's a great little example where within the course of the whole entire book, it does not seem all that significant, but it could kind of be an example of, hey, look what this person does. And if you were doing, lack of appreciation or lack of morality, lack of caring, certainly, yeah, you would expect robot sandwich man to show up. You would expect, maybe Rose of Sharon, the guy selling cars, but you can a lot of times emphasize your point by calling attention to people who actually do have that morality or do things out of the goodness of their heart. Like, who would be other examples that would kind of be like the truck driver who leaves the big tip? I mean, who really does probably appreciate what she has? I'm not saying she's happy all the time, but who's like the antithesis to Rose of Sharon? I think someone might have said it. Yeah, I'd say probably Ma. Poor people can always count on poor people. We're going to be there to help. So she is someone who is not just worried about what they have or don't have, but she's worried about people in general. What are we doing with these characters? With Ma, Rose of Sharon, truck driver. Steinbeck doesn't come out and say Rose of Sharon is selfish, Ma is good, truck driver nice. We're making these assumptions based on... You can have foil characters where, Julius Caesar, we had this with Cassius and Brutus and whatnot. The thing with foil characters is you really need them to be driving forces throughout the whole entire thing. Ma definitely is. Rose of Sharon, you could argue, they could be foils. It might not work for like the tractor driver or people in the expository because we don't see them. But we're determining their values based on little details. It's not direct characterization by Steinbeck, but it is indirect characterization, bless you, by Steinbeck. So indirect characterization in itself is a device. How so? Because you find those little details, not to get confused with the numbers that we talked about, with details and diddles, but those details help you kind of formulate your understanding of those folks and what Steinbeck's trying to get across with them. So, a device as simple as that could end up going a long way, with this. I think of imagery quite a bit when it comes to, I've already talked about this, but when that rotting fruit, at the end, toward the end, I think it's chapter 23 where that one comes in. What do you have surrounding, all throughout California, people who are starving, need anything, and you have all this fruit that you could give to them that would help them, that they would gladly take, but no, we don't want it, we'd rather them rot. We don't appreciate the fact that we have these things. We don't appreciate that we have a place to live in. We're more concerned about keeping those folks out. And so, the imagery of that fruit, and you certainly get a lot of references to the grapes fermenting and going bad and whatnot within that same chapter. Could be some imagery examples to kind of look at. Some of you could be going, I already used some examples in my first essay that would work really well for an argument that I'm thinking about. No, you cannot change the title and change the thesis statement and go, boom, I'm done. 2 essays done. Thank you. I'll let you use 2 of the same examples though. So if you do have an example that you think would still work really well, of the 9 that you need to use, 2 you can carry over to your second prompt. But once you start having 3, 4, 5, 9 replicating, we have some serious issues, difference of opinion starting to take place there.
What are your thoughts on chapter 5? You notice kind of avoid it, use it once and then avoid it.
I don't want you to avoid it because I think it's a really good chapter. I think it's a really effective chapter, and I mean it is rich with the literary devices, and that's why I wanted you to read it again. I have concerns when it dominates entire paragraphs and things like that, so I would kind of use it as a springboard to locate some others. Yesterday when I was walking around, I was telling people if they had more, like 3, 4, 5 examples, I said take it down to 2 for that particular chapter. But one thing that I was kind of noticing for some folks, and I'm not calling anybody out, specifically, I don't remember who you were, and it wasn't just one person, but there was clumping of evidence, where paragraph 1 is all chapter 5, paragraph 2 is all chapter 13, paragraph 3 is all chapter 30. Yes, they're spread out, but we still want you to go beyond that 2-3 page range to start to find some examples. I'm hoping some things that we talk about tomorrow will certainly help you with that. So no assignment for tomorrow, but I would say look over draft number 1. Any to-be verbs that you notice are giving you fits or problems or could be problematic, highlight that sentence. We'll look at it tomorrow. Yeah, you can. I would say if you can use different ones, I would recommend it just so you don't grow dependent only upon. But certainly if you went, I'm not writing about syntax. You don't have to do that. Because if you do use the same device, you're still finding different examples for it. So.